Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.
And first, we're going to start off with who controls the railroad. I got stuck in one today on Minnesota coming here, but we had a constituent ask some questions, some very good questions, and I think a lot of us have had interest in knowing those answers. And with us today, we have John Malloy, who's going to be the president of the Ellis and Eastern Railroad. John, come on up, and maybe sounds like you've got a presentation for us, so welcome.
Thanks, Councilor Jameson. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor Huther. Is that better? Good afternoon, councilors. Yes, I'm here to not only talk about who controls the railroads in Sioux Falls, but kind of give you a little railroading 101. And this is a really cool map. Can you guys see that on your monitors? Is that what? Okay, good. It is entitled A Bird's Eye View of Sioux Falls in 1881. And you can see one of the most prominent features in the map is the railroads. And at this time, I think there were two railroads coming into Sioux Falls. One of them was called the Worthington and Sioux Falls Railroad. And that is actually the predecessor of our railroad. And the other one was the Wilmer and Sioux Falls Railroad, and that ran from Wilmer to Sioux Falls. And that is currently the BNSF. But you can see how small Sioux Falls actually was back in 1881 and where the railroads ran. If you see the railroad that curves around, so that picture actually looks from the east to the west. And if you see the railroad that curves around to the south edge of town, that's the what is now the Ellis and Eastern. And it's crossing 14th Street there and is out in the middle of the country. And then you can see downtown where the rail yards are currently located. And you can see Sweeney Island over there and the 8th Street Viaduct and the 10th Street Bridge. And I think there might be 3 railroads there, and the other one is, I think, the Illinois Central or the Rock Island. But anyway, in 1878, August 1st, 1878, the first railroad called Sioux Falls and Worthington came into town amid much fanfare, and that is actually the predecessor of our railroad. Shortly after, the Wilmer and Sioux Falls came to town. Those have all fallen by the wayside now, absorbed by bigger railroads, and bigger railroads absorb bigger railroads. Some of the other ones that used to be in Sioux Falls are the Great Northern, the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Omaha, the Chicago Northwestern, the Rock Island, and the Illinois Central. There are only 3 current railroads in Sioux Falls. The BNSF, they are by far the biggest railroad that goes through Sioux Falls. That's called a Class 1 railroad in railroad terminology. The D&I, which stands for Dakota and Iowa, and the E&E are Class 3 railroads. 3 classes of railroads. Class 1s are the big transcontinental railroads, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, Union Pacific, CSX, Norfolk Southern. And Class 2 railroads are DM&E size railroads. Sioux Line is a Class 2 railroad. And then there are hundreds of smaller short line railroads in South Dakota. Well, in the United States, in South Dakota, I think there are a half a dozen short line railroads. And in 1980, the Congress passed the Staggers Act, which deregulated railroads. Prior to 1980, the railroads were controlled by the Interstate Commerce Commission, and they had basically total control over the rates they could set, whether they could abandon the track or not. And we all know that in 1980, the Milwaukee Road went bankrupt, forcing the state of South Dakota to buy the bulk of their tracks that were in the state just to provide rail service for our agricultural products. Over the course of the next 20 years, railroads divested themselves of much of their money-losing tracks, and because of a lower cost structure, short line railroads were able to buy those railroads, rejuvenate them, and provide a necessary and profitable service. My railroad, Ellison Eastern, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Sweetman Construction Company, and we were founded in 1988 when the Chicago Northwestern abandoned its track from Worthington to Ellis. And we were forced to buy the track because without it, our quarry out by the fairgrounds wouldn't have had rail service, and that's a vital component to having a cost-competitive quarry, because rail transportation is much cheaper than truck transportation. We move about 6,000 cars a year. 4,000 of it is for Sweetman products, and 2,000 is for third-party customers that are located on our line. Our biggest customer outside of Sweetman by far is GCC Cement Terminal that is on Marion Road and 9th Street. And they get in about 2,000 cars a year. Just so you get an idea, 6,000 train car loads would require 25,000 trucks to haul that much freight. So you'd have 25,000 loaded trucks going through town and 25,000 empty trucks going back. The other two railroads in town, BNSF, primarily the trains you see of theirs are the big long shuttle trains. They're up to 125 or 30 cars, and they move from Madison, they come down to Sioux Falls, and then go out to Garrettson. And they also bring shuttle trains in from Marion and Parker and the line going clear out to Mitchell. They also serve industries in Sioux Falls that aren't on our track, primarily in the Airport Industrial Park and up by the industrial park near Citibank. That's all served by BNSF switch crews. The D&I Railroad is a subsidiary of LG Everest, and they haul rock from their quarry, from the Everest quarry in Del Rapids, just pass through Sioux Falls and haul it to Sioux City, where they have a distribution terminal there. And it's not exact, but approximately 10 trains a day move through Sioux Falls. Train schedules. Everybody gets upset when they have to wait for a train at a crossing. But that is because at their core, railroads are service-oriented industries. They're servicing their customers. Their customers want cars delivered at a certain time. The railroads are obligated to do that. They wouldn't be in business very long if they didn't. So you can imagine what kind of railroad would, there wouldn't be any successful railroads if they only ran trains between 10 and 11 and 2 and 3. And besides the Burlington Northern, Santa Fe Railroad schedules their trains in Fort Worth. And it's not just through Sioux Falls. They schedule a train from its beginning to end. And so a train traveling through Sioux Falls has probably 2 crews just in South Dakota, and 1 crew can only go 12 hours. They have to stop and get the new crew on, and then that crew takes it perhaps to Wilmer or Sioux City. So it's just so impractical to try and schedule trains to avoid rush hours. It's just impossible. And besides, the Federal Railroad Administration and the Surface Transportation Board regulate railroads in the United States. The FRA sets speed limits and governs grade crossings, track conditions, and operating practices. Surface Transportation Board primarily, well, it is the successor to the Interstate Commerce Commission. They also look at rate reasonableness, and if a railroad wants to add track or abandon track, they still have to go through the Surface Transportation Board. All federal regulations preempt state and local regulations. So if the Sioux Falls City Council would pass an ordinance that said you can't run a train over 5 miles an hour in the city limits of Sioux Falls, that would be preempted by Federal Railroad Administration regulations that say that the speed of the train is governed by by the condition of the track. Sioux Falls does have one city ordinance covering railroads, and that limits railroads to blocking a crossing for more than 5 minutes by a stationary train. That does not govern how long it takes a moving train to pass a crossing. So if you're stuck behind a 100-car train, well, for one thing, that's not the Ellison Eastern's train. But even though it might take 5 minutes at the crossing, that does not fall under the Sioux Falls ordinance. So if you get right down to it, the bottom line is railroads are the ones that control their schedules. Future railroads, all the railroads in town are waiting for the rail yard relocation to take place. But one thing I wanted to make clear is that will reduce train traffic through the downtown area, but it won't eliminate it. There will still be trains traveling through the downtown area. If the rail yard gets relocated to the east edge of Sioux Falls, there won't be any switching movements, no back and forth across the crossing. The two vital components, I think, from the railroad's point of view are that the first component is moving the switch yard to the east side of town. The second one is constructing a connecting track from the Madison line, from Madison, South Dakota. The track currently comes down by Falls Park, crosses over the river, but the track is not configured to enable you to make a left turn and go out on the track going to Garrettson. You have to come down through downtown, cut your engines off, so you're blocking Cliff Avenue, 8th Street, 6th Street, cut your engine off, bring the engines clear around to the other end, then back up onto a different track, and then pull out through Garrettson, to Garrettson. So that's inefficient from the railroad's point of view, and of course it's completely tying up half the town with traffic. As Sioux Falls grows, rail traffic will increase because it is so much more efficient than trucking. 2 workers, an engineer and a conductor, can do the work of 500 truck drivers. And railroads can haul 400 tons of freight 1 mile with 1 gallon of fuel, whereas a truck can haul 125 tons of freight 1 mile with 1 gallon of fuel. And Warren Buffett is a pretty shrewd businessman, and he just bought Burlington Northern Santa Fe lock, stock, and barrel. And I don't think he would have done that if he thought that the railroads were a dying industry. So we're going to be here for a while. That's really all my presentation, but I'd sure like to answer some questions.
Any questions for the railroad president, Mr. Malloy?
Yes.
Councilor Entman.
So basically what you're saying is that your schedule or your client's schedules really determine how we travel, how the rail travels.
That's exactly right.
That's what you're saying.
Yep. If our customers want cars delivered at a certain time, that's when we deliver them.
So you're not purposely blocking the streets?
We're not purposely blocking the streets, no.
Okay.
You know, probably the logical thing to do is to build an overpass for each crossing if you never want to be stopped by a train. But for instance, we run 7 miles of track in town here, and we have over 30 grade crossings. And 12 or 14 of them have signals. So the other ones are crossbucks only. And do you all know what a crossbuck is equivalent to? In a street sign? A yield sign. When you come up to a crossbuck, you have to look both ways, make sure no train is coming. If it's safe to proceed, you can do so. If not, you have to stop and yield right away to the train. If you see a flashing red light, that is the same as a stop sign. You have to stop, determine if it's safe to proceed, and if it is, you can proceed. If it's not, then you have to wait for the train.
Councilor Aguilar.
John, you said that the federal government pretty much regulates the trains. Who enforces those regulations?
The FRA, Federal Railroad Administration. We have inspections by different disciplines within the FRA more than 12 times a year.
So they come in and count the number of cars that are, I mean, like spot checks or?
Well, what they're looking for is safety
Okay.
primarily. The condition of your track, is your track safe to run for the speeds that you're running on it? Is your equipment safe? Are the brakes able to stop the cars? And are your employees operating safely?
Thank you.
Any other questions for John? John, I have one question on the railroad relocation project that's coming. Does your railroad have any interest in that property that would be vacated?
Yes, we do. We used to own the yards downtown from underneath the 10th Street Viaduct out to almost to I-229 near Cleveland Avenue. And we sold the downtown yards to the Burlington Northern in 1989, shortly after we bought the railroad. But as part of that sale, we retained the right of first refusal for that land. That if the BN was going to sell that land to anybody else, they would first have to offer it to us under the same terms.
So you're a big player in this railroad relocation,
No, we're just a little guy.
but I think you hold one of the keys.
Well,
Next week, I believe it is next week, November 15th, we're getting an update, right? Would you be available for that meeting?
Sure.
To be around?
I think I'm available.
That'd be great to have you included. There's a whole lot of other people that I've been talking to lately and recently on that subject, and we're going to try to get just as many people as we can who have a piece of that puzzle, and maybe we can unlock this thing and get it done. But I'd really appreciate it if you could be there.
You bet.
Great.
Yes.
Any other questions? Any other? All right, well, John, I think our constituent who is interested in some of these questions is here. Maybe you, if you feel so inclined to introduce yourself to John, I think you guys could talk later.
Pardon me? I'm Mr. Stanga.
You guys could maybe talk later. I guess he's the one who had brought up some of these questions, and thank you for all your information.
You're welcome.
And we'll not try to run into any railroads, trains. Thank you.
No, because it's dangerous.
Yes, the train wins.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go. Come on, let's go. Come on.